Good evening. We're just gonna keep that open. Oh. Hello, everybody. Real quick, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me all right. Excellent. Good, good, good. I hope everybody had a fantastic weekend and a good Monday so far. So if you have only just joined us for the first time, welcome. We are doing a book reading series, the Kishara series, by Amelia Atwater Rhodes, as you can probably see up here. So we are on book 3 at this point. So if you have missed the previous 2 books, please feel free to go onto my bio and it will take you to my YouTube page. And that way you can find the videos of the previous 2 books for this series. Julie, what's up, girl? So for anyone who has returned to us, welcome back. It is good to see you again. So I hope you all are ready to get started in a few minutes. We'll give it till about 5 after for people to get logged on and get comfy. Grab your favorite beverage. Get into your comfy clothes. And I can't remember. I was looking ahead a little bit into this book to see if there was going to be any more of the Falcon language I was going to have to read, because we really got introduced to it in the last book, and no surprise to anybody, I'm not fluent in the Falcon language, so I did my best. I did my best. So, because it's definitely in the, I mean, it's not the prologue, but it's like the thank yous. Come on, green screen, work with me here. Like, more Falcon language. So, if we happen to hit some more of that throughout this coming book, I'm gonna give it my all. I'm gonna give it my all, and hopefully that will be sufficient. So, Miss Deborah, hello. Oh yeah, by the way, okay, so depending on who you are, happy Indigenous Peoples Day, or happy Columbus Day, whichever you wish to call today. Happy this day today. Because I know if you're here in the US and you work for the government, I think you had the day off. Admittedly, I completely forgot that today was Indigenous Peoples Day and Columbus Day, and I was driving to work and I'm like, wow, there's no traffic this morning. Nice for a Monday. And then I'm like, oh yeah, it's a holiday. That's why. All right. So it's 8:04. Get a little bit chapstick on my lips. We'll go ahead and we'll get... All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. All right. Prologue. Here we are, among the lucky ones who live in times of peace, in times of hope and dreams and laughter. Here we are, in the glimmering Wyvern's Court. Yet my dreams are not of the slate walks and marble plaza of my home. They are not of the velvet floor of the nest, of the exotic serpent's dance, or the haunting melodies that can be heard at all times from the southern hills. nor are they of the glint of sunlight on soaring wings, or the smooth hum of avian voices. Anmeek, that is the city of which I dream. Anmeek, the falcon land of which I have learned so much and so little all at once. My parents refused to speak of the land in which they were born. They have accepted this avian serpient world as the only one they will ever have. But Lillian has painted my dreams with images of a city that glitters with magic. She speaks hesitantly of her homeland because she knows that my parents' crimes will forever keep me from this island, but each word twines around some part of my heart. I will always be loyal to Wyvern's Court, but how can I fail to think about the tall white arches that are said to be created not by any creature's hand, but by pure strength of will? How can my nights not hold roads that sing a melody no voice or instrument can produce? Anmeek. Of course, I have learned of the city's namesake, the god so powerful that even those who laugh at myths fear to call his name in vain. Anmeek is shown in art as a white falcon, diving through the sky and sea alike, and his domain is power, it is control, it is magic. The serpents of Wyvern's Court worship Anamirak, the goddess who grants free will, and they fear Anmeek. The falcons, however, believe that Anmeek has a gentle side, just as the serpent's Anamirak has a violent one. Anmeek is the one who can grant sleep and silence. When whatever nightmares plague my mother's sleep have become too much, I have heard her call to Anmeek, and I have seen my father's look of horror. Long ago, the serpent and the falcons made up one civilization. They worked and worshipped together, until something caused the two sides to clash, and the falcons were driven out of the land. Serpent history books say that Anmeek's followers practiced black magic, endangering the falcons and the serpent, and were exiled for that reason. Lillian always shies away from the subject of the conflict, saying only that history is easily distorted by years, and by the teller. As a falcon raised in Wyvern's Court, I do not know what I believe. I try to base my decisions in fact, but what facts are left from a fight that occurred thousands of years ago? I ramble. I find that I do that more of late, as I think of things I will never have and never know. I am posted in Wyvern's Court as one of the princess's personal guards, a lofty rank of which I am proud. But contentment, that is beyond my grasp, drifting away as though in a gust of Anamirak's storm winds. Anamirak's domain is also of spilled blood, of fire that sears, of tempests that drown. Beauty and light and passion are hers, but simplicity she can never grant. Nasius Silvermead, Wyvern of Honor. Chapter 1. My breath stilled for an instant as I watched the blade slice a hair's breadth from the fair skin of Eliza Charday Cobriana, 19-year-old princess of Wyvern's Court. Relax. The reassurance came from the cobra beside me, Eliza's only cousin, Salem Cobriana. I've seen her perform this blade dance 100 times in the nest. He shot me an amused look as he added, with dulled blades. The dagger went up once more as Eliza sank to the ground, closing her eyes and bowing her head before clapping her hands behind her back to catch the weapon one final time. Members of the audience approached the dais, where Eliza remained perfectly poised as her fans placed flowers and small gifts in front of her. This had by no means been her debut, but it had been her first time performing the Jais Fanlas, the blade dances that her parents had almost forbidden her to learn. After seeing her perform, and seeing just how sharp the performance blades were, part of me wished they had. A serpent dancer could, and often did, risk her life in pursuit of her trade, but Eliza Charday Cobriana, however, was not just a dancer, but heir to 2 thrones. Her mother, Danica Charday, was the avian to Alethea, and her father, Zane Cobriana, was the dient to the serpent. Eliza's reign would mean the emerging of 2 monarchies that had, until our parents' generation, been at war for thousands of years. But first Eliza had to choose her king, a decision for which all of Wyvern's Court waited anxiously, and one that led many a young man to try to court her. Eliza smiled at me, meeting my gaze just long enough to express her exhilaration before a petite, golden-haired girl managed to slip through the crowd to stand next to me. Surprise washed over Eliza's face when she saw the unexpected guest, and she quickly came towards us. "I can see why your parents objected to your studying these dances," Sive Chardet remarked, admiration clear in her voice despite her chastising words. "My mother would never have allowed it." Siv was 3 years younger than Eliza, but was the younger sister of Eliza's mother. Though still very avian in her mannerisms, she had made a point of stepping away from her avian tutors and spending more and more time with the Serpient in the past few years, learning their ways. She had not bridged the gap between the two cultures as completely as Eliza had, but that she was here at all spoke volumes. 20 years earlier, a young avian woman would not have been permitted to walk alone through the market, much less watch the scandalous dances of the Serpient. She's not quite alone, I thought as I scanned the crowd. Siv's Alistair, Prentice, was standing just beyond the edge of Eliza's audience, his gaze never leaving his charge. I watched him carefully, for out of this group, he was always the most likely to cause a disturbance. The Raven had made his distrust of serpents very clear, and he became especially irritable when Siv insisted on spending time with the dancers. Serpient hugged and flirted casually with almost everyone, but Siv's Alistair bristled at having to tolerate that kind of attention being paid to his pair bond. Salem, leaving on his way back to the dancer's nest, greeted the Raven politely. Prentice nodded curtly at the Serpient. He had argued with Salem in the past, but that day they managed to walk by each other without raised voices. Progress, at least. "Ridiculous," Eliza said to Siv, oblivious to the frosty moment between the two men. "No one has died performing a blade dance in 60 years. Siv looked at me as if seeking reason, before realizing that Eliza was teasing her. Siv's scandalized expression made her appear even younger than her 17 years. It made me think back to when I had been a child and my parents had first brought me to see Wyvern's Court. I remembered the day 15 years before as vividly as if it was playing before me at that moment. I stood beside my parents, trying to mimic their careful attention as they watched Eliza and her family. My mother, Kell Silvermead, was captain of the Royal Flight, one of the elite guards who protected Eliza's mother, the Tuolithea. My father was her second in command. Their attention never strayed far from their charges, but mine shifted momentarily to the rolling hills and gentle valley where architects had been laboring for years. Eliza's grandmother, Nicola Chardet, was there, with a nurse next to her holding the sleepy infant Siv. Salem, exactly 20 months older than Eliza, suddenly pulled away from his mother and father to whisper something in the princess's ear. Without warning, both royal children took off down the hill. Adults tried to follow, but Eliza and Salem thought it was a great game to hide in the empty market stalls from their parents and guards, deaf to all the worried shouts. Eliza touched my arm, startling me from my memories. "You look skies away," she said softly. I realized suddenly that the crowd had disappeared. "I was thinking about our first day here," I said, though I knew that wasn't enough of an explanation. It was not my habit to let my mind wander, not when I was with Eliza. I looked around uneasily and tried to account for the missing minutes. "I hardly remember it," Eliza admitted, not noticing my disquiet as she led us from the market. This was our ritual. We walked and talked until we reached the woods, and then, beyond the edges of the court, we changed shape and spread wing. We were so young. I just remember you finding me after I got lost in the woods. No matter what kind of trouble I got into, it seemed you were always there. I didn't say aloud that I could still find the exact tree beneath which she had been cowering, though it was true. My parents were the only people I knew who had never been surprised by my memory. "Of course," my mother had replied once when questioned by my teacher about my fast progress. "He is a falcon." She had never said those exact words to me, but they always hung in the air every time I shot past my peers in class. I had begun training with the Royal Guards when I was 9, while others my age were still studying or playing. Many of the children had been wary of me, a falcon, in their midst. They knew the falcon's history of black magic, and they knew that the falcons had sided with the avians, against the Serpient, during the war. And none of them liked being around someone who made them feel stupid. By 15, I had become a Wyvern of Honor, one of the dozen members of Eliza's personal guard, and that position meant more to me than any teacher's praise. Again, my parents had been proud, but not surprised. Standing side by side on the street, we looked nothing alike, but I would always be their son. Before I had even been born, my mother's falcon magic had given her the visage of a sparrow, and my father's had made him a crow, but their power was bound now. That was why my pale golden hair did not match my parents'. My mother frowned at the way it lightened to silver in the front. Beneath my hair, my feathers were blue-violet. When I grew the wings of my demi-form, the markings were peregrine. My parents' magic had altered their forms irrevocably, but genetics had made me the child of what they had been, falcons. Nicias? This time Eliza sounded worried. Is something wrong? You've seemed so distracted lately. For the past several nights, my dreams had been filled with the white towers of Anmique, and my nightmares had been stained by cobras trapped in ice and whispering voices I strained to hear, which made me stumble in the cold darkness. I haven't been sleeping well, I said, not elaborating. Eliza had her own burdens. She didn't need my troubles. I must just be a little tired. Too tired to fly? She asked, her tone light, but her expression more serious. I'd like to get out of here for a while. Unspoken between us were the many reasons she usually asked me to stay beside her instead of one of her many other guards. I was only 1 year younger than she was, and we had grown up together. I was also the only person in the court who didn't call her Wyvern, a nickname she hated but would probably never shake. The serpents in her guard could never follow her in the skies, and I knew that Eliza disliked flying with the pure-blood sparrows and crows and ravens that filled the avian side of town. She preferred to fly with a falcon, someone who not only could match her pace, but also was just as out of place among the avians and serpient as she was. But the most important reason, the one she would never speak aloud, was that she preferred to fly with someone who wasn't courting her, and never would. Soon the serpent were going to stop treading lightly around her half-avian parentage and start pursuing her, and the avians were going to start panicking. I saw that Eliza was always cautious not to show more favor to one male friend than any other now. With me, she never had to worry. She would be queen of the avians and serpent, and so she must have one of them as her king, and I was a falcon, and my parents had cautioned me many times about the dangers of choosing an avian or serpent pair bond, regardless of how I might feel. The other falcons would never allow such a union. Eliza and I would always be friends. Once we reached the woods, Eliza stretched her arms above her head and sighed. In the afternoon sunlight, she was beautiful in the most uncanny way. Her black hair glistened with red highlights. The feathers that grew on her nape ranged in color from deep copper to rust. Her eyes were as golden as the rising sun and were surrounded by long, dark lashes. And here, out of sight from the rest of the world, she shifted form. Her serpent body was as flexible as a whipcord, its scales the same color as her hair, black with glints of red and gold. A ruff of avian feathers grew across the hood, spreading on to the powerful wings that unfurled from her back. Wyvern. She cut through the air like lightning. I followed her as a peregrine falcon, shrieking a cry of triumph to the sky that Eliza answered with a call too musical to be called a hawk's screech. Absolutely, without compromise, unavailable. I knew it. She knew it. It made our relationship safe. Oh, okay, Ishmael. Well, have a good night, hun. We'll see you next week. We landed on the shore of a distant sea, hours away from Wyvern's court. Eliza's talons dug furrows in the loose sand before she returned to her human form, shaking her ruffled hair out of her face. We had passed high above many human villages, too distant for their inhabitants' weak eyes to perceive Eliza's form as unusual. Sometimes I consider just flying and flying until I find some place I've never heard of, Eliza confided, her face still flushed from the flight. Then I would land, take my human form, and live there the rest of my life. I laughed a little. Humble goals for the princess of 2 worlds. She joined in my laughter. I must seem terribly spoiled. Arami of the Serpient and heir to the Tuuli Thea, and I want something else completely. No one's ever happy with what they have, I suppose. True, I answered, thinking of my own dreams of flying and flying, until I reached the white shores of Anmeek, an island that lay in a sea I did not know. Time passed in companionable silence as we sat on the beach, waiting for the tide to come in and the waves to lap across our toes. I found that when I looked into the sea just the right way, the ripples where the sun hit the water looked like writing. I mentioned it to Eliza, but she just shook her head. Not from this angle, she answered. She leaned toward me, black hair brushing my shoulder. I caught the faint fragrance of almond, a scent she often wore, and had a momentary desire to wrap an arm around her waist. I fought down the impulse. It was impossible to count how many times over the past few years I had been tempted to say or do something just as stupid as putting an arm around her as her now would be. Finding nothing in the waves, Eliza shook her head again. I think perhaps you've had too much sun, Nasia Silvermead. Perhaps. She looked at me strangely for a moment, maybe hearing something in my voice, a hint of longing for all things impossible. We should get back, she said as she stood. We'll be late for dinner as it is. Again. I pushed myself to my feet, brushing sand from my clothing. Race you? I challenged her to break the tension. Her eyes lit as she teased. Do you need a head start? Hardly, I answered haughtily, which earned me a handful of sand in the chest. Fine, then. She took off like an arrow in flight, gaining air on me almost immediately. The lead she had now would diminish later. Eliza was always the faster flyer at first, but she paced herself poorly, and during a longer flight I almost always was able to overtake her. I let her pull ahead, not pressing my speed yet, and heard her challenging cry as the wind carried it back to me. The air was clear, and I kept an eye on her, but did not fret about the distance between us. I did not fear for the Wyvern's safety, not in these skies. One thing I would never regret about being a falcon was flight. The warmth of the sun, even as it was quickly sinking in the west, the ground rushing by far below, and the steady beat of wings. I complained about my falcon blood sometimes, but never would I complain about having a falcon's power in my wings. I let out a whoop of joy as my sleek feathered body cut through the air. Don't fall. Don't fall. Chapter 2. Rivers, mountains, fields, and trees stretched out below me, their contours forming complex patterns I could never quite follow, and around it all danced the wind, moving east and west, dragging the clouds above and the leaves below. That day it seemed almost as if I could see the lines as they formed, rippled, moved, and reset. If I could only pause to look at them. And suddenly, I lost the rhythm not only of the earth, but of the sky, and felt myself falling as fast as a stone toward the ground that seemed to rush up to catch me. With too much effort, I twisted in the air, changing the fall to a dive. A natural peregrine falcon can stoop at 200 miles an hour as it dives for its prey, and I used every ounce of that ability now. When I reached the ground, I slammed into human form, my heart pounding, breath labored, palms on cool dirt below me as I fought to keep from retching. What had happened? One doesn't forget to fly any more than one forgets to breathe. I could think of a million things and never miss a wing stroke. So what had happened? I tried to stand and found that I was trembling not with shock, but with pure exhaustion. I caught my breath as my gaze fell upon a pair of eyes the color of blue opals. There seemed to be nothing beyond them, no forest, no sky, just those icy gems looking at me from some world beyond this one, as if startled by my presence. The air seemed frozen, and I recoiled. Then the eyes I saw were not blue, but liquid silver. They regarded me with curiosity, and a woman's voice said gently, "Nasius." Mercury bled into garnet as her silver gaze gave way to twin pools of blood, still as death, and furious at my intrusion. "Get out." The words shot through my mind, the woman's voice familiar, but at the same time unlike any I had ever heard. Again I was on the ground, as if that third woman had shoved me away. Illusion? Hallucination? I didn't know what to call the visions. That final gaze had looked like a cobra's. I pressed my cheek to the rough bark of the tree, trying in vain to figure out what was going on. Eliza must have arrived home by now and hurried to dinner, either expecting me to follow or thinking I was already there. Again, I had left her unguarded when it was my duty to protect her. There was no room for a weakness that left me unable to do that. Another, more chilling thought occurred to me. What if Eliza had been under this spell too? I pushed myself up, forcing my limbs to stop shaking. I needed to find Eliza. I changed shape and pressed into the skies, cursing the lethargy that seemed to make my wings heavy and awkward. What had happened to me? I knew one person who might be able and willing to explain. Lillian. But I wouldn't be able to speak to her until later that night. Now I had to find Eliza. I went straight to the rookery and was relieved to find her safe in the dining area. Her cheeks were still flushed from the flight, so I could not have been out as long as I had thought. She shot me an amused, triumphant glance that said she would needle me later for having finally lost a race to her. Then she politely turned her attention back to the crow with whom she had been speaking. My mother had been at the Hawk's Keep with Danica Chardet the past few days, but she did not leave the Tuoli Thea to greet me, or even to ask why I was late. My father was engaged in a conversation with the Dient, Zayn Cobriana, and looked up only long enough to frown at my tardiness. I would hear about it later, but duty had always come first to both of my parents. Eliza did walk over to me, which prompted Gretchen, the python who led the wyverns, to do the same. Silvermead. Eliza's friendly voice cut off what would probably have been a chastisement of me. Next time we race, I'll give you a head start, she offered. To Gretchen, she added, You can hardly blame him for being late when I'm the one who kept him, can you? If only that were the truth. Dinner, despite the presence of the Tuoli Thea, the Dient, most of the royal family, and a few members of the court, was a relatively informal event. I would have liked to talk to Eliza more, but most of her attention was dedicated to her parents and her more insistent suitors. A crow named Maurice pulled Eliza aside when we were through. Though he had been born in the Hawk's Keep, Maurice had moved here with his family when he was 10, and he had been courting Eliza with all of the careful charm of an avian gentleman for the past few years. He was among the most tolerable of her suitors, and tried to be open-minded despite his very conservative upbringing, but I doubted he would ever care to watch Eliza perform one of the serpent's dances. In some rumors, he was named the next king, but those were rumors started by gossips who knew nothing. Eliza spoke of Maurice the same way she spoke of many of her suitors, with some fondness, but nothing more. If you have the time, Maurice said, any nervousness flawlessly hidden behind a shield of avian self-control, I was wondering if you might like to walk with me this evening. Unfortunately, I've promised my night to the dancers, she answered, but if you would like to escort me to the nest, I wouldn't mind the company. Maurice hesitated, as I had known he would. The nest was located in the southern hills of Wyvern's Court, in an area that was primarily serpient. Although avians were not banned from the area, they were somewhat out of place. Wyvern's Court was not yet a perfect blend of the two worlds. Many serpents were just as hesitant to walk the northern hills as Maurice was to walk the southern ones. I believed, however, that every generation would step farther across the valley. Many others of my generation would make the effort specifically for Eliza. Then Maurice nodded, as if he had weighed the benefits of walking with Eliza against the unease he still felt around serpents, and found the former worth the latter. I followed them to the doorway, then saw Eliza take Maurice's arm and felt a pang of envy. It kills you to watch her walk away with him, doesn't it? The soft voice startled me so much that I jumped, though by then I should have been used to Lillian's quiet coming and going. I turned to Lily with a sharp look, then regretted it as her gaze dropped. I'm sorry, she said. I just hate to see that expression on your face, knowing that she either doesn't see it or doesn't want to. It's better that way, I said. Better? Yes, she echoed, the words hollow. I hope this evening is your own at least. I need to talk to you. I'm not on duty tonight. Eliza never took a guard to the dancer's nest. Looking more closely at Lily, I realized that there was sorrow in her gray-blue eyes. Is something wrong? Lily lived in constant fear of what might happen if someone discovered that she was not the simple raven most people saw when they looked at her. I had tried many times to convince her to tell Eliza the truth, but she had refused. Perhaps you were right, she had said once when pressed, and your Eliza would never betray me to the rest of her people, but I cannot afford to take that chance. A falcon will always be an outsider here, someone to fear and hate and avoid. She had apologized almost instantly, but her words had still cut deeply. Too true. At least I was familiar in these lands, the son of 2 respected members of the royal flight, and one of the princess's elite guards. Otherwise, I doubted my living here would be tolerated. I was not prepared for Lily's answer. I've just received a summons from Araceli, she said. Araceli. It was always jarring to hear Lily say, without hesitation, a name my own parents never dared to utter. The heir to the Falcon Empress was my father's mother, and she had disowned and exiled him before I had even been born. It took a moment for me to register the rest of Lily's statement. I'll be returning home within the next few days. Lily had never pretended that she would be in Wyvern's court forever, but the suddenness of this hit me like a shock of cold water. Will I see you again? My voice sounded far away to me. I knew what the answer would be. Probably not, she replied. I was granted this leave to see Wyvern's court because I lost someone very dear to me in Araceli's service, and she believed I should be given some time of my own. But you must agree that 2 years was a very generous reprieve. Now I have responsibilities to which I must return. I did agree, and I did understand. I just didn't know what to say now. When Lily and I had first met, she had been like a window to a land that had always fascinated me. In the past 2 years, she had become one of my few friends here in Wyvern's court. Besides Eliza, Lily was the one person who looked at me not as a falcon, but simply as Nasias. Nasias! Her sharp tone made me jump. Have you been this distant all day? I'm sorry. What happened? I did not want to burden her with the events of my day, but before I could change the subject, she caught my hand in hers. Nasias, you aren't normally distractible, yet I can see that it's taking the effort for you to keep your attention on me. You look exhausted. Please, talk to me. I took a deep breath and tried to focus. It's probably just fatigue. I've had nightmares the last several nights, and I haven't been sleeping well. I shrugged. I keep thinking about things that happened years ago and completely losing track of time. I tried haltingly to describe what had happened during my flight with Eliza and watched her face turn pale. Nasias, have you spoken to your parents about this yet? I shook my head. Here's some falcon language, I'm sorry. Kele kahea hekna atahir ferat jarka tabkmu. Though I was not quite fluent, I had studied the old language for years. What little I could understand of the string of profanity Lily spat out made it clear why my tutors had not taught me the rest. You have to tell them, she asserted, in a more familiar language. They might have left unmeek, but they're falcon-born, and they deserve to know. I need to speak to my lady. Despite the fear I could hear in her voice, she sounded excited. Wait, I called as she turned to leave. She darted back and kissed my cheek. Go, speak to Kel now. I must speak with your father's mother. I winced as Lillian evoked my lineage again. My hand lost its grip on Lily as she shifted shape and a raven shot into the air. Even though I knew that the bird I saw was a product of magic, an illusion, I could never make out the peregrine falcon she said was her true second form. I watched the raven disappear on the horizon, fearing that I would never see her again or have a chance to say goodbye. Suddenly I heard her voice as clear as if she was standing beside me. Do not worry, Nasias. I have easier ways of speaking to my lady than flying all the way back to the island. I will stay near, and you will see me again soon. Magic? Lily had always been discreet with her power, But now she had given me a taste of what I had never had, and had assumed I never would. I took my own falcon form, obeying her command to seek my parents. An idea, a strange hope, was beginning to take shape in my mind, but I didn't know whether it was a combination of dreams and fatigue, or a reasonable conclusion. Hello, Miss Lindsay. Thank you for joining us. And I just missed my nap. Oh well, that's okay. Chapter 3. My mother was still deep in conversation with the Dient and the Tuolithea when I returned to the rookery, and even if I had been bleeding to death, I would have hesitated to interrupt. Fortunately, my father noticed me idling there and excused himself from the others. What's wrong? I hardly knew how to begin. I could not use Lily's command as an explanation, since my father would not even know who she was. I had known that my parents would never trust a falcon as my friend, and so had never mentioned her to them. Something strange happened to me today on my way back with Eliza. Strange how? He prompted when I hesitated, hating to trouble my father. I was flying behind Eliza, and suddenly I fell. I struggled for words that made sense. I was watching the ground, and then it was like I forgot where I was. I barely managed to land safely. Then I saw something, at least I think I did, something that wasn't there. Sometime during the speech, my mother had joined us at the door, perhaps to see what was keeping my father. He did not seem too disturbed by my words, but my mother's expression was grave. Has anything else happened? She asked. Strange dreams or nightmares? I nodded. Vemka meha anle, she swore under her breath. Ray, say what you must to Zane and Danica. I'm taking our son home. Kel, they'll understand. They're parents too, she argued, never raising her voice from a fierce whisper. Nasias, let's go. We need to talk. I followed her from the rookery to our home on the northern hills. My father caught up with us by wing as we mounted the 2 steps to the doorway. Both my parents normally conducted themselves like older generation avians, controlling their expressions and their voices, but right then they both looked tense and worried. I could not remember another time when my parents had excused themselves from our monarchs to attend to me. Their doing so now, when I was almost 20 years old, could not be a good sign. My mother began to pace in our living room. The restless action was so unlike her that it ripped the question from me. What is happening to me? When your father and I were exiled from the island, my mother began slowly, the Lady Araceli, heir to the Falcon Empress Sharza, bound us into the forms we had used to hide among the avians when we first left Anmeek. She stripped us of our falcon forms and took away our magic. She looked to my father for support as she summarized the tale I knew, then moved on. As you know, falcon magic, Jaes Anmeek, is so powerful that the Serpient and avians have feared it for thousands of years. That magic runs very strongly in the royal house of Anmeek, where your father's mother is heir. It also ran very strongly in me. After our magic was bound, she swore again in the falcon's language, trailing off with a whispered prayer of Varlfamle. Help me with this. That magic should never have showed in you, she continued, not with both of your parents locked from it. But everything you have been experiencing lately I have seen in others, when they first discovered their power. Chills ran down my spine. I had suspected something like this from the moment Lily had told me to go to my parents. Even if I do have this magic, why does it frighten you so much? I asked. I would never use it to harm anyone. You know I would never use it against Wyvern's court. I know, she said, shaking her head, but I worry it will use you. Kel, my father finally spoke, putting a hand on my mother's arm to still her pacing. What if all this worrying is premature? We both left the island when we were younger than Nasias is now, and neither of us have ever had a problem. She looked at him as if he had gone mad, then sighed, her gaze turning distant. Sebastian of Anmeek. He winced when she called him by the name he had once used as Araceli's son. Sebastian would have passed the 4 summers trial without effort. He was royal blood, after all. As is Nicias, it doesn't matter. My mother spoke over my father's protests. I never knew Sebastian, but I can say with certainty that he had years of training before coming to avian lands. I passed the trials when I was 7. It was another 9 years before I fled, and both of us stole avian forms within a month of arriving, which kept the magic in check until Araceli bound it. Neither of us has the ability to teach our son, or to bind him. What do you propose we do, Kel? My father asked, his voice strained. I know the danger as well as you do. What I don't know is the solution. I might not have been raised on Anmique, studying this magic, I said in the ensuing silence, struggling to keep my voice respectful despite my irritation. But I'm not an idiot, and I'm not a child. Would one of you please speak to me instead of arguing as if I am not there? My mother looked at me for a long moments, then said to my father, We have to send him to Araceli. Ask her to— No. My father's response was swift. Sending him to my mother would be madness. The only reason I got out when I was young was that Sifka convinced Araceli to let me spend some time off the island and taught me to force change so I would be able to hide from her. Isn't it madness to keep him here? My mother demanded. I've known that this might happen from the time he was 3 and when I saw the first silver in his hair. I assure you, I have considered every option. All that time, and she never told me, or warned me. My father spoke before I could. Have you considered that we are both outlaws, Kel? There is no assurance that Araceli will even agree to see Nicias, or that she won't execute him on the spot as the son of traitors. If she does see him and agrees to teach him, it will be because she sees herself in his face, a pure-blood falcon with his beauty still intact, unmarred by a crow's features. I am my mother's only child, but I am dead to her. In our son, she may see a villain, or she may see her heir. If she agrees to teach him, it will mean she has no intention of letting him go. She won't force him to stay, my mother said. Nicias will be powerful. If she does not bind his magic, she will need to teach him, and once she teaches him, he will have the strength to resist her. I'm not worried she'll force him, he said, though his voice had the tone of one who had given up. Finally, he turned to me, as if realizing that I had deserved to have some part in this conversation about my life. Nicias, Anmique's magic is powerful enough to destroy its user if he cannot control it. Most falcons begin to study almost as soon as they can walk, just to keep it from killing them. His voice was level, as controlled as any avian's, but I could see the effort that control took. Most royal blood falcons use their magic innately, and so it may be with you. But your mother is right. As a child, even I was given exercises to help me focus my mind and keep me from losing myself in the magic. Ray, he cut my mother off with a look. She sighed, but allowed him to continue. It may be that this fall today was a fluke, caused by your magic waking when you weren't expecting it. It may be that this will be all, and your magic has been crippled by the bonds put on your mother and me, and it will never grow stronger. That would probably be for the best. Or your power may simply have been hidden all these years, and now it will show as true as any falcon's. If it does grow, you may be able to control it effortlessly, or you may not. He drew a deep breath and then continued. If you can't, it will destroy you. It will numb your body and mind until it drives you into what is called Schmeckel. There are rooms on Anmique filled with those who have succumbed to it, those who could not learn to control their power. They are neither alive nor dead, neither awake nor asleep. His voice wavered, his gaze turning distant. He shook himself as if to clear away something foul that clung to his skin. There are 2 people I know who are powerful enough to bind a falcon's magic, my mother finished for him. The Empress herself and her heir, the Lady Araceli of Anmique. My grandmother. She nodded. My father spoke again. My mother is a devious woman, Nicias, not a kind one. If you go to her, I don't know what will happen. I worry you won't return. I could not tell whether he feared that his mother would kill me, or something worse. Did he really think anyone could convince me to abandon my home? He added, "But you may be in just as much danger staying here. I don't know. But as you've said, Nisias, you're not a child. Your mother and I can't make this choice for you." At once I regretted those words, because now I wanted to be a child again, so that I would not need to face this decision. Stay here, where I might be fine, or I might decline into madness, or go to Anmeek, where I might be executed, or I might finally see and study in the city that had haunted my dreams. "I need some time to think," I said. "If it's true that today might have been a fluke, can we wait and make this decision after we see whether it happens again?" "Maybe," my mother answered. "But if that is your choice, I would recommend you ask for leave from Eliza's guard for a while, until we know whether your magic will interfere with your duty. And, Nisias, please try to avoid activities that could be dangerous if you were distracted." Distracted. I remembered falling in the woods, and the time I had lost after watching Eliza dance, when anything could have happened to her without my noticing. Yes, my mother's suggestions made sense. "Tonight we should all get some sleep," my father said. "Fatigue doesn't help anyone keep alert or make decisions." I tried to obey, but as I tossed and turned in bed, images from the day and visions spawned by my parents' words kept shifting through my mind. When I finally did drift into sleep, those visions invaded my nightmares, twisting around everything. I found myself locked inside black ice, frozen and still, unable to escape. Garnet cobra's eyes staring at me with fury, a cobra's fangs bared and glistening with poison. Ice rippling with white lines like a million silver scars. It cracked and shrieked and bled. "My prince," whispered a voice, the same one that had shouted at me in the woods, angrily telling me to go away. "You are too brilliant for this dark land." Then Eliza stood before me. She touched my hand, and then there was fire. I scrambled away, choking on the smell of burning flesh, and slid on the ice. A black cobra coiled around me, the scales cold against my skin. "Why am I drawn to your dreams?" she asked. "What vows bind you to me?" "You're a cobra," I managed to whisper. "I am sworn to the royal house." "My prince, do you think me a fool?" she snarled. Abruptly, the cobra became a python. It wrapped around my body, binding my arms and constricting my chest until I struggled to breathe. "You are the royal house. Your royal blood infects this land like a virus." I woke, gasping and coughing as I tried to draw air into my body. For long moments, I could only feel the cold coils of the serpent pulling me back. Finally, I became aware of a gentler voice. "Nisias, Nisias, come back to me," Lily was whispering. Her hands were warm on mine, which made me realize that I was shivering. I forced myself to open my eyes, disoriented by her presence as much as by the dream. "You cried out with your magic," she said. "I felt you fall, felt you go cold. Did you speak to your parents?" The effort trying to speak made me cough again. My ribs felt bruised. As if reading my mind, Lily placed one hand gently on my chest. "There isn't too much damage," she said after a moment. Warmth seemed to spread from her touch, dispelling the lingering chill from the nightmare. I was so frightened. The door opened. I thought I heard... My mother broke off, looking from me to Lily and then back to me. Her obvious conclusion, though false, made me blush and pull away from Lily slightly. Lily didn't look embarrassed or bother to explain who she was or why she was there. Her fear for me became anger as she demanded, "You left him alone? The evening after his magic awakened, you let him sleep with no one near to pull him back?" "I didn't realize there was anyone in the area who... You and your pair bond hid for years among the avians," Lily snapped. "You of all people must know that there are at least half a dozen of us in the area." "And who exactly are you?" my mother finally asked. Lily drew a deep breath. visibly struggling to control her temper. "A woman who cares about your son," she said softly. "I would think that is something we share." My father joined my mother in the doorway. He glanced at her questioningly, and she shook her head slightly. "Nisaeus, I can fly with you to Anmeek if you would like, to show you the way and keep you safe from your magic over the open seas," Lily said. My father cleared his throat, attracting our attention. "Have you already made your decision, then, Nisaeus?" "What other choice is there?" Lily asked. "I felt his magic clear across Wyvern's court. Even among your avians and serpents, you will hear people speak tomorrow of their nightmares from this evening. Maybe you don't have the power to sense his magic pressing him, but I can tell you without doubt, if he does not begin studying the Jais Anmeek, he will fall within the week." Still, my parents hesitated, as if they were hearing different words than I was, less frightening ones. "You would allow him to stay here, knowing—" Lily let out an angry cry. "How selfish can you be? You know that he will not survive here. He needs— Enough!" She ran her hands through her hair, drawing my attention to the tangles in the blonde strands. I realized then that she must have come here from her own bed. Her hair was tousled, and she was wearing a very simple linen gown. "Nisaeus, do you wish to come with me? I will leave immediately. Every hour you are here puts you further at risk." "I am not going to let my son leave with a perfect stranger," my mother interrupted. Lily turned to say, "This is not your decision to make." She took a deep breath. When she spoke again, her voice reminded me of the black ice from my dream. "I lost my mother to Ekel before I was old enough to know her, and my twin brother several years ago. I have seen too many loved ones fall. I will not lose someone whom I have the power to save." More gently, she added, "Nisaeus will be safe on the island. He is of our blood and has our magic. That means he will be allowed to study. I do not know what crimes led to your exile, but they don't matter. The Empress's laws do not allow any falcon to be held to the crimes of his parents." She sighed. "Have faith in your son. Recall that you are the ones who taught him about duty." Turning from my mother, she touched my hand and said, "If you want to come with me, get dressed. I will go to my home and do the same, then meet you here." I did not need to tell her or my parents that I would be leaving for Anmeek that morning. The decision was already made, and we all knew it. "Wait," I said as one complication occurred to me. "I need to speak to Eliza." "Of course," Lily said. "You are sworn to her. I will meet you outside the nest, then." She kissed me on the cheek before pushing past my parents on her way out. My mother sighed, her head bowed in defeat. She touched my cheek, almost whispering, "She's right, Nisaeus. It's fool's hopes that make us want to keep you here." "May I speak to Nisaeus alone for a moment?" my father asked. My mother nodded and drifted back into the hallway without another word. "Are you really worried that I won't return to Wyvern's court?" I asked. "This is my home. I consider myself a subject of the Tuuli Thea and the Dient and their heir, not of some empress I have never met. And though Araceli may be family by blood, the Falcons have never claimed me as kin. All the family I care about is here." My father drew a deep breath. "Anmeek is, despite all its other traits, a beautiful land," he finally said. "It is a realm where you would be revered instead of shunned, where your falcon features would be seen as a thing of beauty instead of proof that you were different. That alone can be a powerful lure." I shook my head. Vanity isn't enough to make me betray Eliza. "More than that. On Anmeek you would be royalty. You would be able to use magic that few people here can even begin to comprehend." I had no desire to rule over anyone, and although I was curious about magic, I wasn't curious enough to give up everything and everyone for it. And then, of course, there is— "What is her name?" he asked softly. "Lily," I answered. "She has been my friend for 2 years. I know I should have told you, but—" My father shook his head. "I speak to you now because I know Araceli will offer you everything and more to keep you by her side, and I hope you will have weighed all the possible temptations against your love for and duty toward this land." I nodded, knowing what he was implying. "Before you go, there is something I need to show you. for you to remember when Araceli tells you of the wonders of the White City." He unlaced the throat of his shirt and pulled the cloth over his head. I knew many men in the local guard who practiced bare-chested in the summer heat, and even more who wore the low-backed shirts that allowed them to grow the wings of a demi-form at any time, but I had never seen my father dressed either way. Now I realized why. Complex designs had been etched into his skin. Scars covered his back and crept onto his shoulders and upper arms. Some were fine and neat, as if from a sharp blade, and some were broader and appeared burned in, as if he had been branded. I stepped forward, horrified not only by the cruelty of whoever had left these marks, but by the artistry of the marks as well. Shimmering lines of what had to be magic twined with the scars, continuing and layering the designs in iridescent silver, blue, and violet. Someone had created a work of art on my father's skin, with blades and power. It is a crime to imply that the royal family can be cruel, so on the island punishment is referred to as the Empress's or heir's mercy. It equates to torture. Many things on Anmique are equally honey-coated, especially when it comes to the royal family. Keep that in mind. Keep in mind that if you choose to stay, you will be tying yourself to leaders who condone such things. "What did you do?" I asked in shock. I had never dared to question either of my parents about why they had been exiled from the land of their birth, but I had never seen the punishment they had received either. My crime was wanting to live off of the island, among those the Falcons consider savages, the Avians and the Serpient, you have been raised with. Your mother wears similar marks, though hers are worse. In addition to leaving, she argued with my mother to let me go. After Araceli decided we were no longer suited to life on Anmique, after she had decided to let us go and bound our powers, it was pure spite that led her to mark us both. Suddenly, the idea of visiting the White City filled me with dread. My father grasped my shoulders in a brief and uncharacteristic embrace. "You have Falcon blood, but your heart is avian, Nisias. You'll come back to us." The dancers in the front of the nest tried to keep me from entering at first. They relented only when I pressed upon them that it was an emergency, and even then they did so reluctantly. No, a falcon was not welcome in this place. I found Eliza still sleeping, resting innocently in a tangle with several other dancers. I couldn't reach her past the others, so I called her name. "Eliza? Nisias?" She sat up so quickly that one of the serpents who had been lying against her whispered a sleepy complaint before another shifted to fill in the gap Eliza had left behind. "What's wrong?" I winced, knowing that anything I said in the dancer's nest would become common knowledge within a day. The dancers were revered in Serpient society as historians and storytellers, which made them tend to be insatiable gossips. When I hesitated to explain around company, Eliza stood and followed me to the edge of the nest. Out of earshot of the rest, I said simply, "Apparently I inherited my parents' magic. It seems to come with some disadvantages." Eliza's eyes widened. "I hope it doesn't pose a danger." My gut tightened. My parents think it does. I don't understand it all, really, but I'm traveling to Anmique as soon as possible. Belatedly, I added, "With your leave?" "Permission granted, of course, especially if your safety is at stake," she answered swiftly. "We will see you again, I hope." "I'm one of your wyverns," I answered without hesitation, "and I would far rather live in a realm you rule than that of the Falcon Empress." "Take care of yourself, Nisias," Eliza said, with more warmth in her voice than she ever allowed herself to show around her many suitors. She hugged me tightly and kissed my cheek. I heard one of the serpents who had been watching us say something that sounded like, "Lucky Falcon." Lucky. At the moment, lucky was not a word I would apply to myself. And that will take us to chapter 4. Ah! Good timing, I guess. Give me a second. Oh, why does this happen? Ugh. Why? Ugh. Jeez. Okay. Yeah. I don't know why my ring light keeps going out. I guess I just need a new ring light because it's done this before. Oh well. All right, guys. Well, I hope. Yep, I have no idea what just happened. All right, well, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that reading this evening. I know I had fun reading it to you guys, as always. So, until next week, same time, same place, Mondays, 8 to 9. And I will set a reminder this time, because I forgot to set a reminder. So, my bad. My bad. Until then, have a great week. Take care of yourselves, stay hydrated, and I will see you soon. Have a great night.